October 8th, 2024, San Jose, California. SAP Center. The crowd has not fully settled. The puck drops on Game 1 of the NHL season, and a 19-year-old named Macklin Celebrini, fresh out of Boston University, technically still a teenager, takes a full-speed shoulder check, gets up, and does not even blink. Over the next 180 days, that teenager will play 82 NHL games, over 1,400 minutes of high-intensity ice time, and his body will burn somewhere between 60,000 and 80,000 kilocalories across the entire season. That is roughly equal to eating 30,000 cheeseburgers. Now let me put a different number in perspective. The average moderately active adult burns around 2,000 kilocalories per day. Celebrini burns more than that in a single period of a single game. But here is the number that keeps me up at night. His connective tissue, his tendons, his ligaments, his joint capsules, is still completing its biological maturation. Dr. Lyle Michelli at Boston Children's Hospital published research confirming that connective tissue mechanical strength in males does not peak until somewhere between 22 and 25 years of age. Celebrini is 19. He is asking adolescent tissue to absorb professional-grade force. Repeatedly. For 6 months straight. So the question is not whether Celebrini is talented enough. He clearly is. The question is what is actually happening inside that body, and how long can it sustain it? I am Sebastian. This is the injury breakdown. Here is a fact most people do not know. Celebrini is not the first teenager that professional sports has thrown into the deep end and watched carefully. In 1979, a 17-year-old named Wayne Gretzky joined the NHL. He was so young that the league had to grant him a special exemption because the minimum age was 18. Gretzky thrived, became the greatest scorer in history, and retired relatively healthy. But for every Gretzky, there is a cautionary tale. Eric Lindros, another generational talent, entered the NHL at 19 and spent the next decade accumulating concussions and major injuries that ultimately shortened his career. And going back further, in ancient Rome, military commanders actually documented that soldiers recruited under the age of 22 showed dramatically higher rates of joint injuries during long campaigns than older recruits. The Romans called it the weakness of unfinished bones. They did not have MRI machines, but they had centuries of observational data telling them the same thing modern sports medicine is telling us now. The body has a biological schedule, and that schedule does not care about your talent level. Macklin Celebrini was born in Vancouver, British Columbia in 2005. He did not come from obscurity. His father, Diego, played professional hockey. The genetic runway was real. Roughly 40 to 60% of cardiovascular potential is heritable, according to the Heritage Family Study conducted by Dr. Claude Bouchard at Pennington Biomedical Research Center. Think of it this way. If athletic potential were a car, genetics gives you the engine. But what you do with that engine in the first years determines whether you get 200,000 miles out of it or whether the transmission fails at 50,000. Celebrini inherited a very good engine. And then he did something smart. He chose Boston University over junior hockey, a decision that placed him inside a structured, high-performance conditioning program before the NHL ever touched him. He did not just get thrown into professional load all at once. He got a runway. Most prospects do not get that luxury. The Sharks then selected him first overall in 2024, and then, immediately, they plugged that carefully built adolescent engine into a professional-grade power draw. His pre-draft testing showed elite-level skating acceleration. His 5 to 15-meter sprint numbers placed him in the 95th percentile of all draft-eligible skaters measured by NHL Central Scouting. Dr. Brian McIntosh at the University of Calgary has documented that this kind of explosive short-burst acceleration correlates directly with a high density of fast-twitch muscle fibers. And here is the catch. High fast-twitch density means explosive ceiling. It also means faster accumulated fatigue under sustained load. That combination, explosive capacity, immature connective tissue, and an 82-game schedule, is exactly the kind of physiological collision that injury researchers flag. Let us go inside the body. 3 systems, each one telling a different part of this story. We start with accumulated neuromuscular fatigue. Think of your neuromuscular system like the electrical grid of a city. On a normal day, the grid handles the load with no problem. But if you run every air conditioner, every factory, every light in the city simultaneously, for 6 months without ever reducing demand, the grid does not explode overnight. It degrades. Power flickers. Response slows. Substations start failing one at a time. In untrained adults, measurable neuromuscular fatigue accumulates after roughly 60 minutes of high-intensity output. Elite NHL forwards typically show declining reactive strength, which is a measure of how fast the muscles absorb and reapply force, after 45 to 55 minutes of game ice time, according to research from Dr. Per Agard at the University of Southern Denmark. Celebrini, as a first-line center logging 18 to 20 minutes per game, is hitting that threshold every single night. Over 82 games, that represents a compounding fatigue debt. And here is the critical detail. Neuromuscular fatigue in adolescent athletes recovers more slowly than in mature adults, because the central nervous system's regulation mechanisms are still developing. That is like asking a car with a brand new but not yet broken-in transmission to handle racetrack load levels for months without ever cooling down. The second mechanism is not muscular at all, and this is where it gets genuinely strange. Muscle tissue adapts to training stress in days to weeks. You stress a muscle, it repairs, it comes back slightly stronger. You have probably experienced this yourself after a hard workout. But connective tissue, meaning your tendons, your ligaments, and your cartilage, adapts on a completely different timeline. Months to years. Dr. Keith Barr at the University of California, Davis published research establishing that tendon protein synthesis peaks at roughly 8 hours after a loading event. But full structural remodeling requires 6 to 12 weeks to complete. Now, here is the problem. In an 82-game season spanning 180 days, Celebrini's connective tissue is perpetually mid-renovation. It never fully completes a structural cycle before the next loading event arrives. Imagine you are renovating the foundation of your house. Contractors are mid-job, walls open, support beams temporarily repositioned. And every 3 days, someone parks a semi-truck on the driveway. The work never finishes because the stress never stops. In an elite adult athlete with fully matured connective tissue, tendons can sustain loads up to 12 times body weight. Celebrini's tendons, still maturing, are being subjected to NHL-level forces during explosive skating cuts estimated at 8 to 10 times his body weight, before the tissue has reached its architectural peak. And here is the historical parallel that makes this concrete. In the 1980s, the San Francisco 49ers noticed that their youngest linemen, those under 22, suffered Achilles and patellar tendon injuries at nearly double the rate of players over 24, despite similar training loads. They were not weaker overall. Their connective tissue was simply not finished. The third mechanism is invisible until it suddenly is not. It is called allostatic load. Think of it like a credit card with compounding interest. You can carry a balance. You can keep spending. But every month you do not pay it off, the interest adds up quietly, invisibly, in the background. And then one day you open the statement and the number is terrifying. Allostatic load is the total biological cost of sustained stress, covering hormonal, immune, and neurological systems all at once. In a healthy young adult, the primary stress hormone cortisol returns to baseline within 1 to 2 hours after intense exercise. Dr. Bruce McEwen at Rockefeller University, who pioneered allostatic load theory, documented that chronically elevated allostatic load suppresses immune function, impairs the body's ability to synthesize collagen, and increases systemic inflammation across every tissue in the body. For Celebrini, who plays games at night, travels across time zones, sleeps irregularly on road trips, and performs under the scrutiny that comes with being the #1 overall pick of a franchise in rebuild mode. The allostatic meter is running every single day. Research on young elite athletes shows measurable immune suppression after as little as 4 weeks of sleep-disrupted, high-load training. Elite athletes manage this better than average people. But management is not immunity. And here is the curiosity worth knowing. NASA discovered this same phenomenon studying astronauts returning from the International Space Station. The combination of disrupted sleep, time zone confusion, high physical demand, and enormous psychological pressure produced allostatic load profiles in young astronauts similar to those of adults 20 years older. The body does not distinguish between a puck flying at you at 100 miles per hour and a rocket launch. Sustained high-stakes stress is sustained high-stakes stress. November 19th, 2024. San Jose versus the Vegas Golden Knights. Celebrini played 18 minutes and 42 seconds that night, logged a primary assist, absorbed 3 significant body checks, and skated an estimated 6.2 kilometers at high intensity. A standard workload for a top 6 forward. The visible story was a teenager thriving on the NHL's biggest stage. The invisible story was his Achilles tendons, patellar tendons, and hip flexors absorbing their 43rd consecutive night of professional loading. The aftermath was standard. Post-game stiffness, foam rolling, cold therapy protocol. Nothing dramatic. And that is precisely the danger. The damage accumulates long before the drama announces itself. Now, what does this mean for you, whether you are an athlete or not? You can steal 3 principles from the science behind this story. First, connective tissue priming. Tendons adapt to load only when exposed to progressive, long-cycle stress with adequate recovery windows. Performing heavy slow resistance work, think 3 to 4 second controlled lowering on squats and deadlifts, 2 to 3 times per week, is the stimulus that drives tendon adaptation. Researchers at Copenhagen University Hospital confirmed that this type of training increases tendon stiffness by 41% over 12 weeks in athletes under sustained load. Second, neuromuscular reset protocols. Reactive strength, meaning your body's ability to absorb and reapply force, degrades with accumulated fatigue and partially recovers with low-load neural activation within 24 hours of competition. 10 minutes of low-intensity movement like box steps or slow hurdle walks in a recovery session. The morning after hard training accelerates return to baseline by up to 30%, according to research from Dr. John Cronin at Auckland University of Technology. Third, allostatic load monitoring. Track your resting heart rate variability every morning. It costs nothing if you have a basic wearable. A drop of more than 15% below your rolling 7-day average is a documented signal of elevated systemic stress. Dr. Marco Altini, who has published extensively on heart rate variability interpretation for athletes, recommends substituting low-intensity technical work whenever that drop occurs, rather than pushing through. Here's the bigger question this story raises, and I want you to sit with it for a moment. We celebrate the 19-year-old who looks like he belongs. We celebrate the 82 games. We treat 1,400 minutes of competitive output as confirmation that the first overall pick was worth it. Maybe it is. I genuinely believe Celebrini is the real thing. But physiology does not care about narratives. It does not care about draft position or contract value or the noise inside a hockey arena. It runs its own ledger. And right now, that ledger records an adolescent connective tissue system under professional-grade load with insufficient remodeling cycles, a neuromuscular network accumulating fatigue debt across a 180-day arc, and an allostatic account that is being drawn against every single night. After his first NHL game, Celebrini said something that stuck with me. He said he just wants to be out there competing every night and does not think about anything else. That is the spirit of an elite athlete. It is also, almost word for word, what every great athlete says in the years before the injury that changes the conversation. Remember the number from the opening. 1,400 minutes of high-intensity ice time in one season. That is not a flex. That is a biological invoice. The body will present it. The only question is when. The question for every athlete at every level, not just 19-year-old phenoms in the NHL, is whether the adaptation you are building is outpacing the debt you are accumulating. That gap is performance. When it inverts, it becomes injury. Watch Celebrini. Because what happens to that body over the next 3 seasons will tell us something important about what we are actually asking young athletes to do. But this level of early career physical load comes with a dark physiological consequence. And one player has already shown us what happens when recovery science meets an almost impossibly resilient body. In the next breakdown, we are uncovering how Connor McDavid returned from a serious knee injury in time to lead Canada at the Olympics, what his physiology actually did during those weeks, and what it cost him. Click here to watch. McDavid versus injuries, the physiology behind his epic Olympic comeback. I am Sebastian. This is the Injury Breakdown.